was a little palate cleanser before we move on to round 2 of Trump. Because I don't want to cover him this much, but he's just so much shit's going on, and it's going to affect not just how the country functions, but the financial markets, what the market does. It's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect your taxes. I mean, so we need to pay attention to what happens to this election, because it's going to be dramatic. Because if Trump wins, things are going to get bad. Your taxes are going to go up. We're going to be in a trade war with China, so inflation's going to spike again. Things are going to get bad. Corporate America is already panicking about Trump coming back into office and what that's going to mean. I mean,
it's not good.
Yeah, it's not
good for your wallet. And if you ever had any hope of actually retiring, you probably want inflation not to go insane. You want your taxes not to get higher, because it's going to put the squeeze on every little thing even more. And if all of that stuff goes higher, all of your other expenses are going to go higher too. Landlords are going to have to jack up rents, because they need to try to cover their whatever. So you're looking at literally everything costing you more, and you not being able to put anything aside.
Right.
Assuming you even can right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see how that goes. But here's the big Trump thing. So is the 14th Amendment, Section 3, is Trump eligible to run for president? Because under that 14th Amendment of the Constitution, Section 3, anybody who's engaged in insurrection or given aid and comfort to insurrectionists and has taken an oath of office can no longer hold office. So Trump has been found now by, 3 courts to have committed insurrection, 2 in Colorado and 1 somewhere else. So Colorado said, no, we're taking him off the ballot. He can't run for president because he's being part of an insurrection. And according to the Constitution, if you've done that, you're no longer eligible to run for president. Well, that's going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to hear that case February 8th. So this Thursday, 2024, depending on when you're watching this video, right? That's when that case is coming up. So pay attention to that if you get a chance, or if you get a chance later, if you heard this, go look it up, because you'll want to see what the arguments are. But this is a little taste of what the arguments are going to be. Now, we covered this a couple weeks ago, I think last week too, a little bit. And we were like, okay, we think the Supreme Court is probably going to find a way to weasel their way out of it and punt it. And they're either going to punt it to Congress or punt it back to the states. Now that I've seen the briefs from basically the prosecution side of this, the plaintiff side, it's versus what Trump put in, I don't know how the Supreme Court doesn't just rule that he can't run for president. They have really boxed them into a corner here. And so we're going to go over this a little bit, but here's MSNBC. I always forget this guy's name. But yeah, he's going to introduce this for us real quick.
The Supreme Court will hear the 14th Amendment case to bar Donald Trump from the primary ballot. Oral arguments are set for Thursday, with the justices weighing Colorado's decision to disqualify Trump from that state's Republican primary ballot for engaging in insurrection. Trump's attorneys have claimed the Supreme Court ruling to remove him from the ballot would, quote, unleash chaos and bedlam. More than a dozen other challenges to Trump's eligibility for office are now pending. Joining me now, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman. He's a legal affairs columnist for the LA Times and host of the Talking Feds podcast. Harry, thank you very much for being here. In the short time that we have, there are 2 key questions around the 14th Amendment. Does it apply to presidents? And what counts as insurrection? So help us understand how the Supreme Court could answer either of those questions.
So look, the text fits. There's a lot of historical analysis, and they've had been a whole avalanche of briefs that really have driven home the officer argument doesn't really bear up very well. And insurrection, we saw it in front of our eyes. They have what they need to make the ruling, and there's nothing anti-democratic about saying insurrectionists need not apply, and it's in the Constitution. But it's a very vexing moment for the Supreme Court, because you have to think they're going to be loath to authorize a sort of quilt work, different pattern in different states. Trump off in Colorado, on in Wyoming, etc. They are in a tight spot.
So he didn't really get into it in too much explanation there, but there's a number of questions that are going to come up. And we'll go through them. The first one is they were saying, well, in the wording, it doesn't specifically say the president. Okay. So that was one of the first issues that came up in this case, right? So Trump's saying, well, it doesn't apply to the president. It applies to every other office, every other military.
So you couldn't be the mayor of Palermo, North Dakota, if you were an insurrectionist.
No.
But they're going to maybe try to argue that you could be the president.
Right. So there are 2 points for that. So they did all these.
Well, that sounds ridiculous.
So they got all these amicus briefs from historians, legal scholars, and they got all these together. And these guys got together and wrote these really extensive amicus briefs. And I've read through some of them, but I made some notes here just to give you guys kind of what there was. So this first question: does the 14th apply to presidents? Both the amicus briefs that I read that mentioned this said, though it doesn't necessarily specifically say it word for word, right? This question came up in 1866 when they voted on this amendment, and the guy asked. It was here it is, Maryland Senator Reverdy Johnson in 1866 asked why it didn't mention the offices of president and vice president. One of the other senators, Senator Lot Morrill of Maine, explained both offices were covered by the provision because it says no person shall hold any office under the United States if they took an oath to support the Constitution. Right? So you can't sit there and say, well, it applies to everybody but the president because it wasn't specifically mentioned, right? That's a stupid argument. You're arguing form over substance there. And they've already debated this, and Congress already agreed, no, it covers the president. So this is already in the record that everybody agrees it covers the president. And they agreed when they were passing it. So it's been clearly stated. All right. So you can't really use that argument. The other thing that was funny about this, another argument they mentioned was, so by that standard, the president's oath to office means less and is less binding than an 18-year-old kid who just joined the military and swore an oath to the Constitution. If that kid commits insurrection, he can no longer ever hold office again. But if the president does it, it's okay. So the president's held to a lower standard than everybody else in the government. That doesn't make any sense, right? It's the highest office.
Right. Highest office, lowest standard. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. That's what you give a king. You don't give that to a president. The president has a higher expectation. So that argument's not going to float. It's just not, because and that's not the only time it's been argued. It's been argued a bunch of times, and they've covered it. It covers everybody, any person. It's pretty clear. All right. So the second was the riot and insurrection on January 6th? Okay. Well, here it is. The district courts in New Mexico, Colorado, and the Colorado Supreme Court already ruled that it was, and the January 6th committee report refers to that day's events as an insurrection 78 times. So yeah, it's already been determined that was an insurrection. Pretty unanimously, it's been determined. Right? So no, you can't say it wasn't an insurrection. The next question was this: did Trump actually participate in the insurrection? Well, the clause doesn't just apply to him physically being there. He didn't do that, but also to giving aid or comfort to insurrectionists, which January 6th committee found he did. And so did the court in Colorado found that he did, that he was guilty of incitement of insurrection. Plus, this was part of a much bigger plan. So there's intent in everything that they can show. Right? So was he a part of it? Yeah. So we've covered it. Does it apply to presidents? Yes. Was it insurrection? Yes. Was he a part of it? Yes. So he's 3 for 3 on his motion to have this dismissed from Colorado. Should it be up to the voters? So this is the argument. We've gotten this from a bunch of commenters too. Should it be up to the voters whether Trump can be president again? Well, there's a couple things there. The 14th Amendment has qualifications. You have to be over 35. So if we as a society, got 100%, like Timmy, who's 5 years old, got 100% of the vote, still can't be president if he's 6 years old. Doesn't work that way. He could get all the electors and everything.
Right. So you still have to fit certain criteria before you get to go on the ballot to be voted on.
Absolutely.
So 5-year-old Timmy doesn't get to be on the ballot, even if we all think Timmy could do a much better job than anybody else. And arguably, a 5-year-old might do better than some of the people we've had. But we have to wait for another 30 years for Timmy.
For Timmy before he can run. Yep. So all that's going on. So there's that issue. The other part of it is also the voters kind of did vote Trump down. He lost by almost 9 million votes in the last election cycle. Right. But on top of that fact, there's another case that they're going to bring up that just happened here in Oregon, where I live. So in Oregon, we have a system with our state Congress, House and Senate, where we have to have a quorum. So 2/3 of them have to be there before you can vote on anything. Right. Well, about a third of it is Republican, because all the rural towns have Republican congressmen and whatnot. Well, they don't like our tax bills, and they didn't like the environmental bills and the employee retirement system bills for public employees that were passed. So what they did was they just started walking out, and then they just not show up for months. So they blocked any legislation from getting passed because we don't have a quorum. So what happened is, I think it was 2019 or 2020, a bill came out, and it came out to the voters, and it was a Democratic vote by the people. And it was, okay, the bill said this: if anybody in Congress, in the state Congress, Oregon House or Senate, misses 10 days, consecutive days, right, without a good excuse, without like a medical reason or whatnot, then they can no longer run for office, any office in the state of Oregon. Ever again. They can finish out their term, but they can never run again.
Basically, it's to prevent them from holding everybody hostage.
Absolutely. So what ended up happening? That passed with like 75% of the vote. Of course it did, because everybody in Portland, in the metro area, which we are, most of the population of the state lives in just the Portland metro area. Like 3 million out of the 4 million people here live in the Portland. We were all like, yeah, we want to get all this shit taken care of. And we can't because these 12 Republicans keep holding us back. Well, it passed. And yet these guys still did it. So now, of the 12 Republicans that are in the House and Senate, they make up a little over a third. 10 of them are no longer eligible to run. Because they, even after the bill was passed, they missed 10 days in a row. And then what happened is they're running, and they basically went to the governor and said, well, you can't do that. And the governor said, no, it was voted on by the people. It's law. I can't. My hands are tied. What do you want me to do? Overrule the will of the people so you guys can come in and obstruct legislation again?
So you can just make it so nobody can get anything done?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
Plus, our governor's a Democrat. So she's not going to sit there and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to help the Republicans, you guys, to obstruct legislation that I want to get passed so I cannot get elected next year. No. So then they took it to the Oregon State Supreme Court, who said, no, you can't run. It's passed. So now that whole argument at the Oregon State Supreme Court is going to be part of the Trump disqualification. See, Oregon did it. There's lots of precedent for it in the past. Malcolm X couldn't run for office because he was found to have committed insurrection. He was never charged or indicted with insurrection. I mean, this has been done many, many times. So should the voters have a right to do it? No. It's already been voted on and decided by our representatives. In fact, it's not just like it's a bill. It's an amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
It's the highest bar you can cross to get that passed. So no, it's already been decided. And then you can go into other stuff, Trump and due process, Trump's whole, I didn't swear to support the Constitution. It's like, well, preserve and protect covers support. Nobody's going to sit there and say, yeah, you have to use that specific word. So he made a good point, too, in the clip we just watched, which is if you take that back, so if you take it to the Supreme Court and they try to punt it back to Congress, it's like, well, that's a stupid argument because it's an amendment. Congress has already voted and decided on this. And this has been discussed and voted on, decided on. There's lots and lots of history that basically backs up that no, he's disqualified. We've used this many, many times in the last 160 years. Right? This has been brought up.
Right.
This is not a new issue. It's just new because it's never applied to a president before. That's the only difference here. But in every other case, it's no. The other thing is they say, well, if they make a ruling where they let the states handle it, well, now you're going to have this weird patchwork system where it doesn't make any sense on a federal election, which will be really fucked up. So they could do that, and that would be the best thing they could do for themselves to punt it, but they're going to look really fucking stupid because some of the states will have him on the ballot and some won't.
Right.
And then it'll be an issue of, well, if he wins, like let's say Oregon takes him off the ballot and New York takes him off the ballot where we live, right? If he wins, then we got to sit there and go, well, wait a second. He wasn't even eligible. We didn't get a vote. So do we have to recognize it? If he issues an executive order, he's not a legitimate president because from our standpoint, he wasn't elected. Couldn't even be on our ballot. So now now the Supreme Court's in a real bind because if they do that, it could be a fucking shit show, especially if he wins. Even if he loses, it's going to look bad. So I think the Supreme Court's kind of forced into a position now where they're going to have to say, now I don't know that they'll do this. I'm sure they'll try to find a way to wuss out of this if they can. John Roberts, I mean, if anything, his legacy is going to be he's a total right-wing pussy. That's how he's going down in history now. That's how every historian talks about him now. He's going to try and find a way out of it. But honestly, the only answer they can really give to this is, yeah, he's disqualified. That's the only legitimate answer you can give by any literal interpretation.
I don't think they'll do it.
Yeah. But it's the consensus of all the historians and all the legal scholars. Yeah, we'll see what they do. But it's good. That's why that's what I'm saying. Check it out, kids, because everybody's basically dying to see what happens Thursday with the opening arguments. It'll take them a few months to come to a decision, but the arguments will give you a sense of where they're going or what they're trying to do. But it looks bad. I don't know how they get through it. But yeah. So that's all we really had to cover for the news today, unless you wanted to add something else to that, but